thing rolling. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Winnetka Village Council study session for September 13th, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order, ask everybody to mute or turn off your cell phones or other electronic devices. This is a study session, so there is no Pledge of Allegiance this evening. We've got a we are having what's shaping up to be a long evening. I'm going to open it up for public comment, which is the time when anybody from the audience can address council on items not on the agenda. Even though I normally don't enforce a strict time policy, I'm going to ask people tonight to keep your comments responsibly brief, because we have a lot of work to do here. It doesn't mean we don't want to listen to you, but we certainly have a lot of work to do, and we've already been at it for an hour and a half. So would anybody like to speak this evening at public comment? Come on up.
Yeah, my name is Steve Juliuson, and I'll be brief. During the pandemic, I was trying to donate furniture to Cancer Fed or Goodwill or whatever. Nobody would take it because of the pandemic, so I found there was a place called Chicago Furniture Bank, and they're down in South Whipple in Chicago, so it's a bit of a haul. But I found out that they will refurbish furniture in addition. Like, they'll take mattresses, anything that's not wet and destroyed by the weather. So I thought, I sent you pictures and email, all these different, it's like debris on the side of the, road and streets and things. People just set it out and they don't know what to do with it, and then you had to pick it up, the village does, and then they put it in a landfill. And so I asked the people at Chicago Furniture Bank if they would like to take furniture, and they said they would. What they can do is take a tractor trailer, put it over on Willow Road, and then you'd fill it up. You could bring it over yourself and fill it up, have access to it, and then when it's full, they'll take the truck and switch it out, bring it empty, and take the one down to Whipple Street. The only thing is, not everybody wants to do that. And if you did it, you would also could work out, you could get a deduction if you're going to itemize, which is good. So, and they, like I said, they refurbish all their mattresses. They get a lot of mattresses from hotels and motels, things like that. So the only issue is if somebody didn't have the ambition to take it over there, if you guys have Lakeshore, the question would be, can Lakeshore, instead of throwing it into the back of a compactor, if they could pick it up and just take it over there. I don't know. To me, it's like you wouldn't necessarily be spending any more money to do this, and you would keep your landfill expenses lower and fill up landfills at a less rapid rate. And if you're interested, I can get them to get in touch with you and work that out between maybe the Village, Lakeshore, and Chicago Furniture Bank. And I think it would be probably a win-win. Low-hanging fruit. So that's my comment for tonight.
Thanks, Steve. Mm-hmm. You're the only one left, Teresa. Keep it tight tonight.
It will be. Hi, Teresa Lucas, Good Grapes up the street. So I'm here to share my latest experience with the Phase 4 construction and the failing communication. And I want to be really honest. I'm at the end of my rope, Mr. Bahan. I'm just at the end of my rope at your team's failure to communicate. So on Friday was my annual wine tasting event. It's the largest event of the year. And we partnered with Moms Demand Action, who were the proceeds recipient. And so there's a lot of promotion on it. There was a ton of coordination, planning, execution. We were wrapped up tight to begin and to set up. And so that was hijacked because while Chestnut Court was opened on July 1st, the parking signs weren't put back up, temporary or permanent. So a gentleman who was completely in his right drove around the village looking for someplace that he could park the day for, and so about 1 o'clock he parked there, and he never came back. We had a team of 18 people, and that setup was tight to begin with. We had 190 ticket holders from 16 municipalities and Congressman Brad Schneider coming. It took 40 minutes to locate that person. Our setup was just down the tubes. It was beyond stressful of how much planning we went to showcase Winnetka, Chestnut Court, Good Grapes. It was the biggest event for this chapter of Moms Demands Action. And again, we have no communication on it. And I sent an email out to some of my peers saying, do we have an email from the village saying we're not putting up parking signs? So Mr. Bahan, I reached out to you because it's your team that's failing to communicate. I'm not talking about the project, I'm talking about communication. And it was bounced to the person who's been failing to communicate. And it was justified in an absurd manner. And if I understood Mr. Barnell's justification, the polls for the parking are due later this month. So the plan, if my understanding is correct, was to go 3 months without parking signs. And it is beyond my understanding the number of discussions that have taken place in this room and outside about the importance of parking to the businesses, and that's the decision that was made. And I think it warrants investigating who was involved in the decision and who represented the businesses. And first of all, it was embarrassing, and I hope you're embarrassed, I have to be honest, because it was embarrassing in front of all those Mom Demands Action people. And I just can't connect how that decision is acceptable. So I think it warrants finding out who weighed in on it and who represented the businesses, that the plan was to go for 3 months where parking is without parking signs. And the guy was in the right. I mean, he said, I drove, I looked for it. So that shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have spent 5 hours pulling up tables and chairs from the basement for the 4th of July weekend. The communication is failing. And it has been. Any questions or comments for me? I didn't think so. Here's the email exchange in case anyone's interested. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay. Tonight, council will be discussing the water fund budget and potential village code amendments to the lead service line replacement and notification act. Water and Electric Director Brian Keys is here to review, and you can take it away, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate your patience. I know it's a longer topic than normal. So tonight's topic's on lead service line, and it's going to follow the agenda tonight. Will follow what's in the longer written out agenda packet. So I'll start with a quick executive summary, and then we're going to talk about actually what is a water service connection, actually defining the code. And then we spend a fair amount of time on the lead service replacement notification action. Again, it's a legal document that we're obligated to follow. We'll talk about emergent and planned replacements, kind of what our peers and other communities are doing, and then staff's prepared some recommendations, and I'm confident that it'll generate confidence as we go, comments or questions as we go through it. So in 2021, the state enacted the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. This started, our obligation began on January 1st. And it started with a requirement to post an inventory by April 15th of this year. It started with not allowing us to do partial lead service replacements, which we've had some prior communication with the council in May of 2022 about this topic and how it impacted water main projects. And we'll have to develop at a later date in time a plan to replace all of the lead water services in Winnetka and submit updated plans. And then finally, we have 17 years to actually complete the replacement of all the lead water services. The reason I'm in front of you tonight is we're looking for some policy direction to help us prepare or finalize the 2023 water fund budget for your consideration, and there's potential amendments to the village code. So kind of laying the context, our water system is 72 miles. That includes the unincorporated area. We have 4,494 connections, and about a little over a third of those, 1,500, are constructed with lead or partial lead service lines. The village code has actually, in the water utility section, there's actually a specific section on service connections. And with few exceptions, your water service connection is solely the property owner's responsibility for whether it be installation, alteration, maintenance, repair, or replacement. But the code does give 3 exceptions to that factor. Basically, it says if the village is, through their course of work, damages a service line, that will repair it, or if needed, replace it. In a residential neighborhood, the code says in the public right-of-way that the water utility will make a repair and/or if need, replace it. And then finally, in the commercial district, will repair and/or replace it up to the curb line in the commercial district. So kind of jumping into what's really precipitated tonight's discussion. So the Lead Service Line Replacement Notification Act. So this again went into effect on January 1st of 2022. And the key to tonight's discussion as I present the scenarios is partial lead service lines are no longer permitted. So partial mean from the village's water main to the parkway, or from the parkway/property line into the house, that you have to do both sides. Whether this is a planned job or an emergent job, i.e. a leak on a property. So this gives us through 2038 to get this done. One could say it's an unfunded mandate because it did not come with funding that we're going to be able to get in the near term. And so I'm going to walk you through the act, and I'd like to acknowledge that a lot of this work was prepared by our village attorney, so if I have to phone a friend, he's sitting next to the village president. So we've completed our first obligation, which is we've posted our initial inventory on the village's website, and it's posted not only by the summary detail that you see here, but it's at the address level, and I'll show you an example of that. So we're required to post that, and we'll be required to submit reports to the Illinois EPA beginning next year and each year thereafter. The inventory is created from records. You were not required to go dig up someone's front yard to determine what service. So you could use customer information, plumbers, local knowledge, or records. And in our case, we had great what we call water service cards, which were, for the most case, with the exception of 31 locations, we believe we have a pretty accurate inventory. Yes, sir.
Should we wait to the end, or should we ask a couple?
It's whatever you'd prefer.
Is that number of 33% left lead, is that a pretty good number compared to other communities? Is that a bad number? I mean,
well, I
seems
think
like it's less than I thought it was going to be.
Those numbers are coming.
There's going to be some comparison numbers.
Okay.
But I think what you'll see is that the older a community is, the more lead service it's
Sure,
going to
of
have.
course,
So the further you get out, like we got some data from Naperville, they're bigger, way bigger than us, but from an age of a community.
Sure.
So I think I would go with the correlation, the older the community, the
Yes.
more lead services it has.
Okay. Yes, no question. Okay.
So this slide 7, this is an example of the address level detail that's available for not only the trustees, but every resident in Winnetka. It's on the website, the village's website. We're required to post it. So the two links at the bottom, you could type those in, or you could go to the search bar. But again, you can pull up your address and you'll see what our records show. So in this case, it's saying, house has copper service. Partial lead means one side or other, or there's some piece of lead was at one point, or copper or lead was mixed together. So it's not entirely copper, not entirely lead. And so that's available for every water connection in Winnetka. So again, starting on January 1st, all portions of a lead service line must be replaced. So kind of taking you through the caveats that come up or scenarios that are addressed by the Act. If an owner replaces the private portion of the lead service under an emergency repair, so they have a leak in their front yard, the remainder of the service must be replaced by the village within 30 days. There's some conditions in there for inclement weather that could be extended up to 120 days. On a planned basis, if an owner schedules a replacement, they are to provide us with 45 days notice, and then we mutually work out a date for the complete replacement. There's no shot clock per se. If the village is conducting planned lead service line replacement, and in our case, what really triggers this is water main replacement projects. We have to give a multilingual written notice out 14 days before we commence work. It's actually in 8 different languages. It says, these are your rights. Make sure you translate this document if you don't understand it before we can commence work. We did that. We are doing that now. There are criteria in the Act where we would have to provide a filter, or the property owner may have to provide a filter to the resident. And finally, anybody that refuses to replace their lead service line is going to have to actually sign a waiver developed by the Illinois Department of Public Health. So if that wasn't bad enough, now we're going to get into one more level of detail, or actually two more levels. We'll talk about how it's going to impact procurement policy, and then we'll talk about cost allocation. So this will impact our current procurement policy. So we have to make, under the Act, a good faith effort to use contractors that are MWB certified or persons of disabilities, and it actually has a ratio specified. And that's what's articulated on that screen. So it has a breakdown of what we have to do. I'll describe on the next slide what a good faith act is, but it goes as far as also suggesting that we divide projects into smaller components so that we can meet this requirement. We have to ask respondent bidders to submit a utilization plan on how they will comply with the good faith effort. And the good faith effort is demonstrated when we would engage in the following: direct solicitation of basically certified businesses, reaching out and providing information to certified businesses, meeting with them after they submitted bids, utilizing assistance of the state and other business offices to reach out and contact those contractor groups, and then actually targeting advertising toward them about our solicitation of bids. So it's going to actually change our current procurement practice, where we do advertise bids now through like Demand Star, and we also notify individuals that have previously bid, but our current solicitation practices for bids don't go to this extent. Yes, sir.
Is this for any project or just projects that have state money involved?
This is, and I'll look for the village attorney Schuster to correct me, but it's my understanding this is for projects that engage upon lead service line replacement, even if it's funding coming from the village.
Yeah, right, so is that for every aspect? Like if a homeowner initiates the change, it doesn't apply?
Correct. So
So that's why we have to figure out a way to incentivize homeowners to.
Right.
At any point, a homeowner can do the work
Right,
themselves on their own
right,
service
right.
line, hire their own plumber,
Right,
and take care of it, and they can use who they want. If we are doing it, and we're paying for it, then we have to follow these requirements, even if it's not a state grant, even if there's no federal
Right.
money involved,
Right, right.
this is the new normal.
right,
Of what's in the act.
right.
So
But
we're
what
gonna-
I'm saying is, so for the private portion though, there's still, even if a homeowner undertakes that line work themselves, there's still a village portion to the main. Does that, these procurement requirements now apply to the portion from, that the village would normally, I don't think they do. It's only if you're undertaking doing 100%.
I think a public or a private homeowner, plumber license can connect to the city water. Is that true?
Say again, trustees work.
A private company could connect to your city main, right?
Private company can and does connect as they pull permits, a licensed plumber. I think, village attorney can correct me, but I think where we would have to comply with this on private property, trustee Dahlman, is if we're funding the work on private property, as opposed to if the homeowner contracts for themselves,
Initiates, yeah.
that would be a different scenario.
Which, that was the question I was going to ask, is if we were to do a reimbursement of a portion of those expenses, does that still count as the
No,
village actively involved
Because
in
they're
the
not,
work?
because the individual's procuring it, not the village.
I do not think it would be required to be done with these requirements.
So if we said we're going to give somebody a
Reimbursement.
$5,000 grant,
Right. Right.
so
If the homeowner wants to spend 50,000, we don't care, we still give them 5, or if they want to spend 50,000.
Correct.
I'm,
So with this, and with this new rule, if we initiate, if you do any type of change, you're gonna have to, the village pays for it from the middle of the street all the way to the house?
I'm gonna hold that question for a second, because we have real life, what happened this year. We've had we're gonna give you scenarios that we encountered this year that we had to deal with
Great.
in helping get to a more focused discussion on what you wanna do. And we'll also talk about, some of the next slide will talk about what happens if we get grants, because it also changes what you may or may not wanna do. So the cost allocation. as you might suspect, this is, in my opinion, this is very confusing on how they wrote it. It's unfunded, and to be honest, and using village attorney's words, it's silent on who bears the cost of replacement. Under the act, ultimately, the village of Winnetka is responsible. So as the owner of the system, we're the ones that are submitting the plan. We're the ones that are required to execute on getting rid of the lead services in 17 years. The default assumption is that it's at your cost, the village of Winnetka's. There's language in the actual act, though, that creates some uncertainty that would imply that you do not have to pay the full amount for private property. So first, one section indicates that any village that receives grant funding must bear the full cost of replacement by the grant. That suggests that entities not receiving grant funding are not required to bear the full cost of replacements. Secondly, the act requires us, as I mentioned initially and went through very quickly, is we have to submit a replacement plan in 2024. And an element of that plan is we have to address affordability and financing options that we looked at to prevent shutoffs for low income. So again, if we're funding it all, why would we need to go through that exercise to show that we went through that financing if the village of Winnetka is funding 100%? So there is some implication in the act as it's written that you can elect to pass along the cost of the service line replacement. And the act does provide additional authority to levy taxes by ordinance or resolution for a replacement. Now, the funding mechanisms that you may have heard about in the media or they're listed in the act are kind of as follows. So the act creates a lead service line replacement fund that starts in basically January 1st and is supposed to be funded. The federal infrastructure bill contains $1.6 billion going to Illinois for service line replacement. And the act creates an advisory board to the governor that's supposed to be in place in July of 2023 to make non-binding recommendations on funding vehicles. But when you look at these mechanisms, they're all going to be prioritized funding to disadvantaged communities. There's mechanisms like disadvantaged communities, highest lead level readings, and those types of things. So on the surface, and Tim's been diligently trying to get us grants, but basically right now I tell you that we're not going to be receiving any grants in the near term for lead service line replacement. And again, going back, it's important to recognize if we do get a grant, we have to fund 100% of the replacement. If we should we at some point in the future get a grant for those projects, then we don't have a choice. You have to fund 100%.
Even if that grant wouldn't cover full cost?
Well, I think the way I would approach it, again, I'll ask the attorney to rein me in, is for the amount, whatever, say we went and said we want a grant for 100 services, for those 100, we'd have to do the full cost. We can't allocate private property versus non-private property if we get a grant. So this is where the practical nature of Frontline hits what happens in your neighborhoods. So in a typical year, the water fund under the current code, basically my staff will repair a water leak in a residential neighborhood on a public road from the main to the property line. We generally have 7 leaks a year. Some statistics, 3-year average is 6.3, 5 years 8, so we're going to call it 7. Most of those are on a lead service line. We don't track how many leaks happen from the property line going into your house. So for this exercise tonight, I'm going to say let's assume an equal number happen on private property. So for emergent leaks, I'm going to tell you that we should probably plan on dealing with 14 leaks a year. And the vast majority of those are lead service lines. The copper lines, even the older ones, generally are not the ones that are leaking. Year to date, we've had 4 service line leaks. 2 of them were lead lines, and we went to those homeowners, and we used a similar analogy that the village council gave us for the planned work, and under the authority of the village manager, as we said, get multiple quotes for the full replacement, and we'll pay 50. The village will reimburse you for 50% of the total cost. So the average cost for the full replacement of the first 2 jobs, one on Garland and one on Berkeley, was $14,620. One other customer is in the process of getting quotes. So we have one active leak, and we had one that did not require replacing a lead service line. So we had one that didn't fit the criteria that would trigger replacement. So in those cases, the homeowner went and got multiple quotes. We were in agreement that the scope of work would be a full replacement. They executed on the work. They submitted documentation. We paid 50%. So that's how we've handled for this year emergent replacements. And that was met our criteria or our obligation for full line replacement from the main all the way into the house. And that was an interim policy under the authority of the village manager, mirrored off of the guidance we got from the council in May. So now we've shifted from like an emergent scenario to what I'll call planned work. So for us, it's water main replacement. Under the previous policy, and what we've done well before I was here, but when we did a water main replacement project, we would replace we would install a copper line of 1.5 inch copper from the water main to the property line if you had a smaller copper service or if you had a lead service. So when we were done, we had basically upgraded all the way to the property line as part of that water main project, and was covered under the cost of the water main project from the water fund. That was, by this definition, is partial lead replacement. So we can no longer stop at the property line. We have to deal with from the property line into the house. So this year, again, I mentioned already, we approached the council in May. We had the capital work that we wanted to do this year that was bundled with road rehabilitation, had 51 lead services, trying to wrestle how we're going to manage this. We changed the scope of work because we had high contractor bids, we had added costs for the lead service line, and we had just the administrative of how this is going to work. So we narrowed it down to 3 projects that had 3 lead services. And at the time, the council gave us approval to go talk to those 3 homeowners and split the cost going from the property line into the house. And we gave them 3 options. One is, we've got a price from the village contractor to do the work. Take this price, you're going to have to reimburse us for 50%. We'll pay our contractor, you pay us for 50%. 2 is, you can get a contractor and have your contractor take it from the property line into the house. We'll reimburse you for 50%, but it's going to be the lesser of whichever one is the lower amount. And finally, is you can opt out and sign the waiver. All 3 residents, and I couldn't say is all 3 residents were of the 3 people, the first 3 out of the box were the most pleasant people and cordial people to deal with. I think if I could say that all the ones in the future were going to be this easy to work with, this would really not be as daunting as it is, because all 3 people opted to go with option 1, were very cordial, and couldn't have been more easy to deal with, except they had some personal schedules for vacations, which is understandable, but I mean, beyond that, it was, getting an agreement was quite easy. So the 3 houses that are up there, the village subcontractor, and then we have basically the total cost on the far right. So the average total cost for the 3 services that were bundled as part of water main work this year was nearly $9,900. So the average customer cost was a little over $4,900. Each of those customers executed an agreement where they're basically remitting back to the village for their 50% share, and all 3 of those projects are completed. So this is kind of the scenario under what happened this year under planned work. This is where it becomes more daunting to me as the person that's responsible for execution. So we've met with the Director of Engineering, Jim Bernal. We've planned out our scope of work that we're entertaining presenting to you in the 2023 budget. And basically the 6 projects encompass 94 lead service lines. So you've got Cherry Street is a carryover from this year, and so is Scott. Scott is, we're trying to transfer off a smaller, older main and abandon it. And in Cherry Street's new water main, in addition to new main on Spruce and Elm Street. So those, based on our records, with that scope of work for replacement, we'll have to deal with 94 homeowners next year and 94 lead services. So as you start to get into this, you're probably already running, I know some of you are already running mental numbers in your head, is this can become pretty impactful to the water fund as far as budgeting and capital. So when you look, we've come up with 4 scenarios just to present some level of dialogue or funding amount. So if the village pays, again, I'm focused on this discussion here is from the property line into the house, because the village would have already paid on a planned job, has already previously paid for service line replacement from the main to the property line. So this is just the delta for the private property work. If we use this year's experience of 98.74 each and 94 services, we're looking at over $900,000 that would be added to the capital cost of the water main project for this year. And then we've created, for discussion purposes, 3 other scenarios: a $7,500 reimbursement amount, $5,000, and $2,500. So if we used what we did this year, which was $5,000 service, and you'll see later on that we're recommending a cap, but say we'll call it at $5,000, we're looking at about a $500,000 addition to the proposed water fund capital project for this year. For 2023, I'm sorry. Proposed for next year in this year's budget. Sorry. Thank you. Yes?
Have we thought about increasing the fees?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's, yeah, there's in the,
You
there's,
can't tax it, but you can increase their fees, right? Water rates. And
So-
can you increase the rates for the people who might be getting the work? So a differential rate based on, like, because I look at this, I get it, it's an unfunded mandate, and everybody's focused on the budgetary impacts, but I'm very focused on the public health aspects. And I think it's a very big concern in the village, especially among, school-age families. And I think that people will be very supportive of cooperating, and if they aren't, they can sign the waiver, right? But there's going to be a funding aspect. And rather than thinking about we have 17 years to get into compliance, how can we accelerate it,
Well-
right?
We'll get there.
Okay.
we're gonna take you, we're gonna get you down to some actual rate numbers, at least touch on it to give you a sense of what that would look like.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then,
I have one question that
Yeah.
kind of goes along, not asking about rates. If the current program is to replace from the water main to the property, does the homeowner have the ability to sign a waiver not to put private to the house?
Well, it's essentially what they do.
I think the waiver,
all or
as I
nothing.
understand the waiver, no, as I understand the waiver is it's assumed that we will be compliant and go from the main to the property line, and that we're giving, the state is giving the entity the ability to waive
Right.
going from the property line into the house.
So if
That's
somebody
get-
doesn't
that's
give
great.
access to their
If someone
house.
doesn't want it, they sign the waiver and we're done.
But the
There's no
worst
cost.
thing about it is, it's my understanding, and Ben, you can tell me, that they actually put a cloud on the title.
That's okay.
Which they should.
They should.
I understand that, but that seems like a pretty.
And
steep
at closing, they
punishment.
take 10 grand to
It
put the
goes
new
against
line
the
in.
buyer beware
I'll bet you
principle.
this starts being like radon
Sure.
Yeah.
and lead testing.
It
and
should be
this is
disclosed on
public.
title.
People will be like, oh my God, I see one of my
Well,
inspectors says
and
you
they-
have a lead pipe.
And they
I
can
want to
negotiate it into the purchase price and say, oh, it's
Right.
lead, I want
Yeah.
I want the buyer
10,000
to
or
fix it.
15,000 off until so it can be repaired.
So there might be a
Exactly.
big rush.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
people
I
are very
Right.
concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll get to those numbers
Yeah, it
Yeah,
should
I'm
be a
with you.
mandatory disclosure.
without even talking them with you, I think.
One other question, when you say, what is considered main to the property line when it's on a private road where your property line is right down the middle?
So in a private property scenario for residential is basically if it's water's bubbling up at the main, I'll have a water crew dig it and make the repair, because you don't know if it's the water main or the service line. But if water's bubbling up 5 feet from the main and we shut off the B box and the water stops bubbling up, then we tell the homeowner, it's yours. And so they own it from the property line, from the main all the way in on a private street.
Right. To the D-box, right. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to keep plugging ahead, thank you. So, again, trying to look at a system perspective, simple analysis for, in today's current dollars, 1,500 lead services, assuming $5,000 a number to start some level of discussion on a reimbursement credit. We're looking at $7.5 million as a total cost, assuming it did stay straight line, no inflation, no adjustments, you're looking at $442,000. With the help of the finance department, we've taken, Tim's staff has put together, what could be lead service revenue funding based on rates, if we went to the rate level. So again, for those that are new trustees, if we follow the water main replacement study, we would be recommending an 8.5% increase for the 2023 water rates, not including any decision that the council would make for lead service line funding. So that's why it's important to know this 8.5%. If you wanted to fund in year one the full 442,000, it would be an additional 7.8% rate increase to get to the 442,000.
Right, and I go back, I think, to the first question. Can that be only charged to the houses that get that? So then, basically, it's gonna be 3 times that, because 2/3 already have the proper water services.
And a lot of them pay for it.
Right, which is myself, you paid.
I paid water that we all do, yes, everybody.
No, it's not. I already paid for my copper.
Right,
Right, right,
that's another thing.
Right,
right.
I think,
We should get through this and then have the policy discussion.
yeah.
that's a good point.
We're almost done.
Thank you.
So I was asked to give you kind of perspective. This is from last year's budget discussion, the black line in the middle, Winnetka 2022. So a typical homeowner, this is again using the same framework that was from the water rate study of 2017 at the time. They said a typical residential customer uses 1,500 cubic feet. In today's rates, if you take your monthly service charge, 1,500 volumetric, you're right, paying $80 a month. If we bump when you go to the 8.5% that would be proposed for next year, you're gonna be at the $87 a month. And then I'm gonna look at Tim, I think if you move to the additional 8%, you're around $95 a month? $94. So you can see how at the time, this was a chart that we prepared for the village council to compare our utility rates to our neighbors from a residential perspective. So 94 puts you somewhere over here where you're at the level, assuming they didn't raise rates in between Glenview and Park Ridge.
Based on the program we're talking about.
Based on just a straw, I think I'll call it a straw proposal to start consideration of what you may or may want to do. Of the 5,000, yes.
Okay.
So we took, I guess to back up, so when we looked at the survey data, which I'm going to talk about now, we took the policy direction from the council in May, and then we applied also the emergent line. We seem to kind of start to correlate around if we're going to do something, maybe $5,000 per customer is where you would start some discussion at. 3 communities, Glenview, Deerfield, Libertyville, and River Forest, have started a 50% cap. 4 communities, 3 of them have basically placed a cap on that 50%. So there's, 50%, and then there's a cap that would kick in, so not to exceed. Certain. So the caps are, in the case of Deerfield, 5,000, and then. So one other item to note is what's kind of appears to be shaping up is those communities that offer a cost share plan don't waive any of the fees like tapping fees and meter fees. Some of this is really playing out literally in the same context that you're dealing with. Glencoe's meeting on Thursday night to have their discussion about what their policy is going to be. I'm working on my presentation. Public Works directors call me, what are you guys doing? I want to know. What are you doing? I want to know what you're doing. So when are you presenting? Mine's going to be out Tuesday. So
Everyone's rates are gonna go up.
everybody, well, I think everybody's dealing with the decision, and then should they do something, you're correct, Trustee Dahlman, is that it's going to have a rate impact or a fee impact, one or both. So again, for your consideration is we've come up with some recommendations, and one is to target a cost share program of 50%, but put a cap on it. So it'd be basically, we're proposing a $5,000 cap. So you've seen kind of what that total impact would be. We would, on emergent repairs, we go to the homeowner when they have a leak and say, when you have a leak, you got two scenarios. One, they may have to fix it right away, and they're going to then ultimately have to do the replacement. The leaks we've had, fortunately, and one was near Manager Band's house, and he called me about every other day about water running down the curb line. But that being said, they still had service. It wasn't creating a public safety issue, so they had time to get quotes and then replace it, so they didn't have to pay for the repair and the replacement. But have the property owners secure competitive quotes, and assuming we had 14 lines, again, 7 on my side, 7 on their side, At $5,000 each, we're looking at a budget impact of nominally around $70,000. Planned replacements, I think we've had a lot of discussion about, we'll have to figure out how to execute, but the first part is getting from you what the policy is on what we're gonna do for reimbursement before we can develop the actual execution of the road rehabilitation and water main projects, because we need to know what the framework we're playing in. But in theory is if we offered those 94 homeowners a $5,000 credit, whether we reimburse them or told them to go get their own contractor, that's gonna add $470,000 to the capital projects for next year, the proposed capital projects. And then lastly, because we have gotten a few calls, is consider what was done previously with the sewer backflow prevention and is create a program. First come, first serve. Funding level would vary year to year based on budget allocation. Still use the $5,000, and so as, again, for consideration, we could do, you know, we'll wait and see what the budget looks like, but for an example here, 30 lines at $5,000 would be another $150,000 and would be first in, first out. And when the 30 lines is gone, or whatever number we land on, then the funding's done. Supporting recommendations would be is that, you know, is put some protection on it that it really goes to those people that are not triggering an upgrade on their own. So if you're doing that bathroom addition and you triggered a plumbing code upgrade of a service line, you wouldn't be eligible for the $5,000. Or if you bought a house with a lead service line and you demo it, you wouldn't get a $5,000 credit to your new house that you're building. And then on an annual basis, we continue to monitor it and make recommendations on whether we can sustain this 50% and or if additional, basically, rates increases are required. And then also, what's the take rate if we do a voluntary program? So we've heard anecdotally that one of our neighbors to the north had a program and it had a very low take rate. So I'm really not sure when we do a program, what the, I'll say, voluntary basis, how many people are actually going to come forward and want to participate. And then lastly, Tim continues to monitor grant opportunities. But as I mentioned before, if we are fortunate enough to get a grant, then there's really not a discussion. We're going to be doing it solely for 100% for that portion of the grant funding from the main into the house.
Which is fair, yeah.
So that's the end of my prepared remarks. And
Okay, here, go ahead. Just technical questions. Here's what we'll do. Whatever technical questions you guys have, then I want to talk about the reimbursement, whether that's something that we're interested in or not, and then we'll talk about potential offset with rate adjustments. But I'd rather get through the reimbursement first, because that obviously is going to inform how much we're going to need on the rate side if we decide to go there too. Go ahead, Andy.
does lead flow downstream? So it's going to go in the direction the water's flowing. So what happens, so that's why we tell, no, so what we tell homeowners is, again, that's why if you have a lead service line, we encourage you to flush your service line when you get up in the morning, so you're flushing the stagnant water that's been setting in the lead service line out. And remember, the pressure is flowing to the source, so unless you can't consider a scenario where a homeowner is going to have a pressure greater than 67 PSI trying to pump it back into the village's main.
I got two questions related to fees.
No.
Not related to that fee. I knew that was coming. You always talk about the tap-on fee.
Yes.
What actual cost, labor cost, is
Oh, yeah,
the tap-on
I've got
fee
that.
versus just a cost?
I've got that broken down.
Careful, you're going to give him some ammunition.
Oh.
He's going to be able to take away.
That's
Service
a,
fees when you're adding a new service.
Trustee Swerk got my message about asking. Trustee Swerk got my message about asking me that question. So on page 16 of the agenda report, I actually went into all the fees that we commonly levy for a new water service.
New water service.
Well, a replacement or a new one. So if you were replacing your lead water service, it's the same as if you're building a new house. Right. And what you'll see is that, so I provided a breakdown for material, labor, and equipment. So labor is, the lineman is actually going to go down in the excavated hole and use a tapping machine and make the physical, put the saddle on and make the physical hole in the main.
Didn't we talk that could be done by the
could.
homeowner's contractor?
We generally, as a rule, what we'll do is we'll do the tap because it impacts the main, and if done incorrectly, it could impact other customers.
Fine.
But their contractor will hook up to the valve
Okay.
and take it into the parkway.
So, okay,
So if you look at the breakdown in page 16, what you'll see is due to increases in cost, if you look at labor, material, and equipment, right now we're losing money on taps. The costs have went up where we're losing now. If you look at, you take labor and equipment out of it, we're still recovering, but maybe on a 4-inch main, we're recovering $143 above the cost of the material. So if there's a decision to waive a tapping fee, there's material that I'm buying to make that tap. There's real dollars. And so I've broken that out. Now where you'll see that revenue exceeds the cost of material and labor is on the meter fee. And by design, those fees were intended to be a revenue source for the water utility. So unless guided otherwise, what you'd see from me when I show up at the budget presentation is tapping fees are going up next year. Meter fee, I could probably hold the price because there's still, utility's still making some revenue, but we're losing money on tapping fees, assuming you want me to cover material, labor, and equipment.
Okay. And my other technical question, a lot of times when we replace it to the home, let's say it's an older home, and you replace the line, are you also increasing the size?
So standard size is 1 inch, so even if your house only needed 1 inch, we're doing it 1.5 inches.
Okay, and that's where the new meter comes into play then?
And then that's where it triggers, because generally what happens is you have a 3/4 inch lead line, it's a 5/8 inch meter, you go to 1.5 inches, then you're gonna need a 1 inch meter.
Okay.
And that's where the new meter comes in. Now, we could potentially give people a choice to stay with the small line, but it might be short-sighted, because they do a plumbing upgrade, they're gonna be replacing a brand-new
So keep
copper
that in mind
line
when
with a
we talk
larger
about
copper line.
Upgrading, okay, thank you, that's good.
And our code is an inch and a half for new construction, right?
I'm gonna have to confirm that with David, but I believe the village code contains a provision that the minimum water service line is 1.5 inches, because I've never seen anything go in smaller than 1.5 inches for new.
For all of new communities, yeah, okay.
Because in a few years, we're probably gonna say that the state's gonna make us repipe the entire house and get rid of lead pipe. So let's not go there. But that's a good question about your backing up, because the house probably has lead pipe too.
All right, well, it's on the table, reimbursement funding. Have at it, guys.
Homeowner pays 100%. Or is there a way to, this is gonna, from private property? If we're already used to replacing from the main to the B-box, totally cool, we've been doing that forever. From the B-box to the house, you should be 100% the owner.
Even that's still a $9,000, $10,000.
Right. So I know
They're
it's,
being forced to do because the people in Springfield
Right.
decided that they.
Okay, let's
they
get
would
off,
rather
let's
send-
get away
They
from
would
that.
rather send all their
Point.
money to Dixmoor, which has been
Okay.
flushing money down the toilet for 30 years
Okay.
with corruption and everything
Right.
else, and now we don't
Right.
get our piece of the action because other people have been irresponsible.
so is it possible
There, I'm glad I got
to
that out.
do a
That's not gonna help
special
anything.
service
We're
tax, a
still
special
dealing
service
with a
area just for the houses that get replaced?
Say again?
Is there a special tax like we did for stormwater? Can it be just for the homes that get the replaced water lines? Did they pay that portion?
So a special service area is a property tax.
Yeah,
And
you have to
there's,
get everybody to agree.
and you have to get a threshold,
Yeah.
or there's like a backdoor referendum where they could kill it.
Is that right?
Okay.
It's impossible.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right, or can we create a utility only for the homes that get the new replacement?
We have the utility.
And we've got the rate. So the question is, can we set a differential rate that would allow us to fund or basically amortize the cost of lead pipe replacement?
Right. And give the homeowner the option, pay the fee or pay incrementally every month.
And that was what I thought of, is that I mean, because, look, I think it benefits everybody if everybody can, if we can incentivize people to change out their lead service, right? That's the goal. Couple things that I thought about, you know, we should be thinking of a master contract where we identify contractors where.
But there you go, your MWB. That's a
No,
pain in the butt.
for the homeowners. So where you get a list of contractors that are certified. We negotiate a good rate, right? They would be guaranteed amount. I mean, these are just things to think about. You could identify maybe 5 or 6 contractors who are qualified to do work with us. We get them to agree to, I don't know, $9,000 maybe, or $10,000 putting on the table whether it's a reimbursement or not, you could figure out a way to put into a voluntary program. We send a notice to these homeowners. Do you realize you have, according to our records, you have a lead service line? These are the things we're offering, whatever that program is. That may, knowledge may help incentivize people to change over. I don't know if that other suburb actually notified people. If it's just a list and you have to go to the website, a lot of people don't realize, right? And then, so the notice I think will help, and if people decide not to participate, but I like Andy's idea that you could decide, people could do it themselves, they could decide, although I know the village doesn't want to be a bank, but you could maybe one idea is you could set a different rate for the people who can't fund it completely, right?
You fund her and have her right. Still how to pay for it, yeah.
Yeah, you pay over time.
We got 7,000 water services in town.
Yeah, but there's only, how many, 1,500?
33%.
Well, on the residential side.
But there's,
That's it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
but there's only 1,500 that are,
That are
right.
led. Trustee Dahlman, quick question. When you're talking
Yeah.
about a master contract, you're talking about not only the agreement that you would have with a contractor, but actually pre-qualifying a set of contractors to do the work, and those are the agreements that are in hand?
I'm just saying we could, that's just what I call it, a standardized contract where you could say, okay, the village has, has identified 7, well, maybe we can't because
We
it's,
can't do that.
but these are a list of contractors that
As
are
long as we
approved
made
to
the
do.
reasonable effort to, all the procurement aspect, or if it's all privately contracted, then it's not a problem.
Yeah, we don't
No,
wanna
but
do
if
that.
they're, okay, so let's go to that. If the homeowner's funding it, but we say we've got there's 6 contractors or 3 contractors are willing to do this rate, and, we get them to say, hey, we're gonna have this huge program, we wanna get as many private homeowners to do this as possible. What kind of, for a volume of work, how much, what kind of pricing could you give these homeowners?
I don't see any reason you legally couldn't go out for bid and say, we're gonna select up to 3,
Yeah,
contractors. You could have 1 theoretically.
yeah,
And you said, dictate the term, right? Respond, you go flat rate, to offer, you will enter into a separate contract with the homeowner, and you will give them a flat rate, and the benefit to them is potentially a large volume of work.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
probably-
ideally, do a whole block at a time.
But we're not entering into contract with them. We were just setting the
We
terms.
might have 1 contractor to be on our list, be a very simple contract.
Yeah.
To be on our preferred list,
Mhm.
you have to agree to.
Just the sets of standards of what you'll do for them, yeah.
Yeah, you will,
Somebody could be free to go out and contract it on their own.
It wouldn't be our money, so
Yeah,
I don't think it would, I'll look at it closer, but I don't think we necessarily would be subject to the
WPE.
requirements. It would just be a matter of, you get on our list by promising a firm rate with a volume discount.
right.
Or however they want to structure. Because somebody's property, if they have a very large property that really wants, they could, this is how we will set our fee.
You could have it-
You have a locked-in
Yeah.
fee.
If it's 50 feet of pipe work, so 100 feet, yeah, there's set fees. over
Right, right.
Or you could do it where, it's a flat rate of 10,000, and the contractor figures they're gonna get the benefit of, average out when they lose money on one, they'll make it on the other.
Exactly.
But we could set up that type of program.
And the homeowner, we could set up a program, the homeowner could decide, no, I'm not gonna do it, I'm gonna sign the waiver, or I'm not, it's not a big deal to me, or I think I have my Joe Blow plumber who can do it better, cheaper, right?
So what happens, let's pretend you do a whole block as a planned water main replacement. The piece that goes from the main to the B box, does that have to be the MWBE requirement?
Homeowners paying for it anyway.
No, that's a contract.
We'll talk about that depending on how the policy direction you set. There's Jim and I talked to the Director of Engineering.
Yep.
And there's 2 scenarios. We may pull the service work out of the water main, out of his road rehabilitation contract, or we may have to introduce MWBE language into Jim's contract for road rehabilitation.
We don't
meet
have
those
windy requirements for our road work as a public contract anyway?
It's not to the level
Not
that's
to this level.
articulated in this act. It's not in our current procurement.
Oh,
And
interesting.
in this process, because you're doing the public police plus the private, can you stop and have that private done by another
So
company?
the challenge here from, that's a great lead into what actually happened this year. So Gage, probably the shortest water main we've done, 1 block, Gordon Terrace to Green Bay Road. The contractor that A-Lamp procured to sub this work to couldn't come when we were ready for them. So we actually had to wait to finish one intersection. So we had to leave the old water main on to serve one house, even though we transferred every other house off. And right now, the state's not giving me any latitude. So basically, when I secure our operating permit for the new main, I have to attest that no lead or partial lead lines are being reconnected to the water main. We actually went to them and said, give us a 30-day grace period so we can hook this old line up to the new water main. We have copper from a partial, but we've got a written agreement that we're gonna finish this, and we couldn't get latitude yet to do that. So for the water.
Well, you should have asked them.
Well.
So that's why, that's
The
why
problem is
it,
we attested to it already. before
Right,
we had to
right.
ask. So the problem is on, right now, unless they change the rules, to your point, trustees, is the execution of the water service replacement has to be a very tight expectation window for the contractor, or you're gonna bring the water main project and repairing the road to a grinding halt.
so that's why I guess it creates an incentive to get people to voluntarily make those service line improvements before you go through your capital improvements for the water main and the road work.
Right, but the challenge is, so we've had this debate too, is then you're gonna have to make them pay to put a new water service all the way out to the old main. We put our new main in, so then a third to half of what they paid to put in, we're gonna abandon and redo under the.
And
under our
it goes
structure.
back,
Because you can't do a partial.
You can't
Yeah,
do a
we-
partial.
Got it.
we talked about this before, I think, and other than the MWBE thing, it's easier to get one contractor to do the entire main to the home. You know their schedules, they know they're gonna do the work.
Right.
Even
this-
though it might be a little more cost, but if we can make that work, that is payable by the homeowner, either a direct fee or a higher bill, that can work too.
This kind of issue has come up quite a bit over the last 8 years or so. We've had the sewer backflow program, we had the fire sprinkler program, we've had stormwater. And the thing that we've always found is, one, we have a universal interest in not creating a blighted property problem.
Right.
And that's one thing that has generally brought us to some sort of a consistent approach to everything, and that's saying, just leave it on the homeowner. Because usually it's in our own interest to have no blighted properties in that one. And we can say, well, this would happen at closing, but
And to be the village of choice.
we want when that could be built choice, it raises all property values, that's how we make money. That is the source of money that runs this whole thing. So that's always been kind of a default, and then we find that there's always these sort of administrative issues when you try to get too clever and you know anything. So working with residents, well, the other thing I'll say is kind of back in what happened. So 1,500 houses need this, say $5,000, worst case scenario, $5,000 for every property, that's $7.5 million, if you do over 17 years, that's $440,000 a year max. That's not a hell of a lot of money, probably. That's $98.
Especially if we're recollecting it on an increased water rate
When
system-wide.
the water is a service provided by the village that we suck out of the lake and then we sell to other companies. It's $98 a house if we do it the way it's proposing.
And
But what happens if it accelerates over, I mean, like, I don't think you
We
want,
can meter it.
right,
We can do though, Tina, because I thought about this before.
yeah, because
Is
what if every 1,500.
General fund can just make a loan
Yeah,
to the water
Utility,
fund,
yeah.
and then, it'll come back to the general fund. I mean,
Yeah.
luckily, we have the capacity to do
Yeah.
that. So if you have a year where we got 94,
right.
right? We could actually handle that, shift it over, and then Brian just pays Rob back
That's
when
a
he's
good
got the
idea.
cash.
But can that house just pay more, can that house pay more for their water?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's.
That would be ideal.
Talk about it like as a, if you say, but, so $98 a house, then we are able to take advantage of time,
Right.
which no individual homeowner can do, right? We avoid when Becca's got blighted properties, we avoid it's terribly unaffordable there, and look what happened with some family moved in, we're not gonna try to, put
Right. No, I don't disagree with that. But your $98, that's times all homes. So if it was only the homes being affected, it would be $300. I mean, it's not a big deal either to say, hey, I've got a new water line, I've got a bigger water line, I've got more pressure in the house. They're gonna be amazed at the difference.
So the
My big-
fundamental issue,
I do look at this different, this is on private property. I liken this to having lead pipes in your home, asbestos in your home,
Right.
radon in your home, a leaky basement and not having a sump pump. So
Yeah.
I do feel this is more unique to the property owner, especially because it's only a third of the houses in town.
I would
Right.
agree with that, except for we're dealing with a mandate that's gonna have impacts to our village operations, right?
Winnebago's always been a buffer against stupidity.
what's that, Randy? Stupidity and what?
No, I mean, I agree with you, Kim, in a normal situation, but we've now been provided a mandate that's gonna affect every time we go and change a water main.
I'd be surprised though, if when people learn that they have lead supply, that they'll be like, okay, I don't really care.
I agree.
I would want to fix it if I learned, you know.
Or sign the
If I
waiver.
learned I had asbestos or I had, then I don't think this even, yes, I disagree with the whole concept of mandates coming out of Springfield. But this is something that would definitely be to the benefit of the homeowner. It is in their best interest.
Yeah, I'm not to go against the whole
Yeah.
replacement thing, but Brian did bring up one of the meetings prior, is that, for one, we drink filtered water or bottled water in our house. And then he says, basically, once you take a shower in the morning, you've cleansed all your lead out of your pipes. If you do a water test, it's not gonna be a big number. It's probably under the requirements.
Generally, well, yeah, so we know that based on how our testing, that we're
Yeah.
under the action level. But again,
Tell that
from
to a new
health
mother
advi-
with a
from
baby,
health-
right? You know?
From a health advisory perspective, lead is bad, they want it out of the system. Now, I will interject that the people that contact me when they learn they have a lead service line is, as I said before, real estate transactions generates a lot of inquiries, buyer or seller. Homeowner with lead service line, I would contradict your belief. Most homeowners are interested in replacing it if I'm going to do it for them at my expense.
Right.
If they have to bear that cost, and after they hear what the real numbers are, they'll either live with what it is or buy a filter
Right.
and have a plumber put a filter in.
Sure.
But generally,
Years from now, Winnebago could be like a remnant town, got a lot of.
No, so the bottom line, I think, we're all in agreement, kind of in agreement to do it. But can they get it funded through that person's water bill? That's all.
Is it,
That would be ideal.
so, to John's question, is that,
so I'm gonna look at Tim, I think, Tim, let me create the logic, so since I know which services have a lead pipe, they could create a different water rate and we can create a second rate for either the monthly charge or the volumetric rate. And so then we would move all those customers, 1,500, to the either new monthly charge or the new volumetric rate. So there's two components to your monthly, your water bill.
I mean, from a billing aspect, it would be similar in concept to like,
So while you're walking up there, Tim, what happens if they do a lead service replacement next year?
Then we change them to the other rate.
it creates another.
So you haven't collected enough money from them to cover the cost.
Well, if they all.
Well, you're gonna
See,
rob Peter to pay Paul.
Well, no, this is just Rob and Peter.
Peter.
Because what I've heard from at least Kim, and I thought from you, was you two don't want to subsidize some person with a lead pipe.
No, I do. Oh, no, correct.
That you
Right,
want
so
that
if they
person
only
with the lead
pay
pipe
4
to take
months
their
of-
own.
So if they only pay 4 months of this special rate on their water bill, and then we spend 10,000 to do it for them, they haven't even
No, I
begun
think
to
No,
pay
no,
the
their
cost.
water
Tim,
bill's
if
gonna-
anything, let me throw another restrictor on that. Yes,
pun
the
intended.
new rate, but the new rate stays on until the
Ex-
recapture is done.
Correct.
So yeah, from a billing perspective, we could set it up within our system. It would be similar to how we bill differentiated rates for, electric, refuse, unincorporated, incorporated. I mean, it can be done on the system. Where it would get hard is the turning on and off of each individual customer, making sure we're in sync with, Brian's team, knowing, when to turn on that rate, when it's off. If there
I
is
don't think
a,
it would be on for
Once-
15, 20 years.
1/1/1/23,
it's on,
it's on.
and then,
And then if we've decided that it takes
5 years, whatever.
10 years to pay off the $10,000,
Right.
okay?
Then we could,
It just stays on until you hit that
Right.
threshold. And once that account, that line account, as you would see it in your books, hits a certain threshold, it just automatically
Right.
falls.
from a billing perspective, something like that could be accomplished. I'm not sure, I know this is probably more for Ben. The law did specify certain funding sources, and I don't know, I don't know if there's restrictions on how, if you can differentiate in that, based on the law.
Could it just be another line item? New waters, service, lead cleanup or something, and here's your monthly bill of $50.
That'll be the first tax
Yeah.
that would went away.
But what if okay, so wait a second. So you're saying you're gonna just charge this to the 1,500 or so people that have lead lines versus,
That have replaced it.
okay, that have replaced it, I see. Because I could certainly sign a waiver and say, I don't want my lead line
Exactly.
replaced. Which but that doesn't help the system or help the village get into
The
compliance.
state believes it does.
I got a sneaky suspicion we wouldn't see as many people running over here to sign a waiver, especially if they knew it was going to
If they could pay
attach to
for
their
it over
property.
time,
Exactly.
yeah.
And if it's just on their bill,
You could,
And you got the same contractor doing it, the city work plus to the house, other than the MWB article. And I know that can be very difficult.
I don't, I mean, in some states, every government contract deals with those sorts of WIMBY requirements. So it's not, I think a lot of the contractors you probably could find could be compliant. They may not be a.
it's just that the contractors that are doing a lion's share of the work up here don't fall in that
Yeah.
category.
Unless you find one that happens to be just the guy that sits in the office and the WB.
Well, I mean, you can always
the real
solicit.
company does the work. I mean, that does happen.
I think to the contractor part, we make that out, when we get to that point, we make that outreach. We go through the
Yeah.
due diligence, and if we don't get it, then we document it,
Yeah.
made that attempt to find that.
Right.
It's
That's part of
usually
what it
not a
says.
requirement to use it if
show
you
that you
can
tried.
demonstrate there's nobody who will do the work. That's
Right.
how,
Exactly.
that's how we live.
That would be the cleanest
It's
for the
easier to
village
just comply.
and for everybody, I think.
Anyway, we've been bouncing around with a lot of different ideas.
Encouragement to divide up projects so you can meet those requirements. So you may end up having to say, we're gonna bid out the road project separate from the water side of it. Now you get multiple contracts trying to coordinate.
Right.
But there are ways to do it and set it up and, but.
You know, the cleanest is just have one company do it all, on a street program or something.
Okay, so
Well,
the fundamental question though gets down to whether the village assists with any transition or not. And what we're saying is, it sounds like to at least feel that it should be as a pay-as-you-go kind of recapture mentality. If the village fronts the cost, then there's repayment over time versus reimbursement of $5,000. Is that fair?
yeah, unless the reimbursement goes back to people who put new lines in previously. Like, three of us at this table probably. It's just not right.
I'm still not convinced I have copper all the way to my house. I'm doubtful of that.
My pipes are made out of Swiss cheese from my experience.
I know, and I was trying to figure out how can I confirm, how could somebody confirm even if we're showing copper on the list?
Probably look at your meter inside coming in.
So in your house, you're gonna look at where it comes through your floor, your
Yeah,
wall,
it's
that's the first
copper.
one. And then the only other way you're gonna determine it is if we do water service work or you pay someone to dig in your front yard and go down to the pipe.
If you see a copper looking thing come out of the ground, it's lead.
Yeah.
No, only kidding.
No. But I bet a lot of people have like 20 feet of lead in their,
Probably
Yeah.
not.
Hire
I think,
Superman can't see.
when you see those, to answer trustee Dahlman's comment, when we see records, again, it's
the
again
plumbing
records. The plumbing records is generally what you see is, yes, there are lines that have 20 feet of copper in them, but usually they started as lead.
Right.
So you're gonna see the lead coming up in your basement. And yes, maybe it leaked and someone put 20 feet or actually probably 3 to 5 feet in
Yeah.
somewhere in your front yard.
Yeah.
But it's generally not gonna be where you have copper coming up in your floor
No, I know that.
and then lead all
Right.
over
But it's
the
maybe
street.
buried in your yard and you really don't know.
Right, exactly.
This reimbursement goes to anybody that might wanna do it. Doesn't matter if it's a private road or not, I assume.
Well, you're all consumers of water.
You're
right?
part of the utility.
Just making sure.
But if you're on a private road, you're not gonna.
You already do.
The 5,000 is probably not gonna cover much,
Right.
right?
And knowing you got 17 years to do this, the big concern is that when he does a water main replacement of 30 or 40 of them coming up next year, you got a way to get those all done and in.
So that's my big thing is,
The logistics.
I don't want us jacking up our road projects for the next 7 years.
Right.
Yeah, we can't
I
do
agree.
that.
I mean, we need some certainty that we can
So,
get this done.
So going
Well,
back to
certain-
the three categories, you got planned work, you have emergency work, and you have people who want to do the work,
Right.
right? So how do you handle each of those so that
Planned
the
work for the
infrastructure
most part.
projects can go forward,
Yeah.
right?
so in theory, this has generated a lot of internal staff discussion, so in.
Yeah, I bet.
So there's some conflicting issues. So first of all, is the council direction at the water main replacement study was the water fund better not open a road unless it's on the street rehabilitation. There's, I think, 20+% savings in the total cost, so we want to be linked. We also recognize that 94 is going to be horrendous to get through. It was three great people to work with, still required a lot of hand-holding. 94 is going to be a nightmare. We have always said, though, that the road rehabilitation program, assuming, if the funding works out, can do other roads that the water fund is not doing. Because in the past, up until we got to recent funding levels, motor fuel tax and other things, the road program always had more scope than the water fund could keep up with. So there should be and could potentially continue to be a bifurcation. Jim's team will do roads, and we're not going to do water main work on those roads. There's going to be this subset, whether it's 6 or fewer, depending on the policy and what your direction is, where we should be playing together. But you don't want me to go play on a road that Jim doesn't have intent of rehabilitating.
Yeah, we need those incentives. We can't, there's nothing more frustrating than seeing all the work you guys have been putting down a nice road, and then next summer you're there tearing the damn thing up.
Well, look at
Take-
Kenilworth, what they've
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
right? I mean,
It's the Midwest.
And a good thing to think about that, on the older homes, when you put your new copper service in, when it becomes a tear down, they're not putting a new water line in, usually. You might be still doing sewer work though, but it may not be as many street,
When they demo, right?
it may not be any more street cuts.
If it's a new copper line, it's the right size, we'll let them do the shut off in the parkway, disconnect
right.
in the parkway, and then reconnect. But to trustee Swerk's point, if they didn't do the sewer upgrade, then they're usually gonna have to go back out and connect the new cut off or redo the new lateral.
Right.
Putting aside the issue of coordinating the streets, we have to replace our mains. That's not a, I mean, it's been kind
Yeah,
of,
it's-
I was
right.
talking about.
That's what we've been ramping up for.
Right,
Sure.
they're blowing up. So we gotta, this can't be something that just creates another roadblock to repairing 100-year-old water mains that are constantly blowing up in the middle of winter, and we gotta stand in trenches all night long. Like, that's what I'm saying, we gotta keep $98 a year per household in the big scheme of things. And I'm not sure I'm hearing from you if that
That's
would
per month,
make your
isn't
life easier when it comes to water main
Well,
replacement or not.
what I'm unclear, in listening to the dialogue between spread it across or the 1,500 is, what I'm not clear is, are you proposing 100% payment for the property line or $5,000? Because
Maybe I just have a question. If we did nothing, how bad does that screw up the water main replacement and the road work? If we do 100%, does that solve that problem? We do 50%?
Well, I think it's easier to go knock on your door and say, Mr. Kripe, we're doing a new water main, and we're gonna pay 100%. If you let our contractor do it, you're gonna say,
Yeah,
sign me up.
exactly.
If I knock on your door like this year and say, Mr. and Mrs. John Doe, we're doing a new water main on your street, good news. Bad news is, you have a lead water service, and we need to charge you, you owe 15,000, but we're gonna reimburse you for 5,000. Now, again, fortunately, the 3 families we dealt with this year couldn't have been more cordial in working through that, but I don't expect that everywhere.
well, and you probably didn't give them a ton of actual notice, right? Because,
That's the other thing is,
yeah, you've got to give people like 6 months to 9 months notice.
but I would expect, yeah, we'll have to give notice, but the 94, I would expect that there's gonna be some people that are not gonna be happy that, wow, it's a great, that we're getting a new water main, but we really didn't wanna spend whatever amount of money that we're gonna move.
That's what I'm trying to. Well, my question is, so
If-
what happens if a homeowner says, screw you, get out of the yard?
Then we would take,
They
we
sign the
have to
waiver.
sign the waiver.
What if they say I'm not signing the waiver?
Then I call the village attorney.
So
You just document what you tried to do.
But that's the problem.
Or absent owner, renter.
Understand will happen in a lot of other communities.
Yeah.
And your customer service levels are far and away exceed what other communities do. They're gonna send a notice saying, they're gonna send a notice saying, we're gonna be doing your street this year. You're responsible for $15,000 or whatever it's gonna be. And this is your window to do it. Stinks to be you. And you're gonna get angry, and they're gonna say, you have a choice. Here's the waiver, or you're gonna pay. And they're gonna ask you once, and that's essentially it. And then, you know, you, and, well, that's the struggle here, because people won't accept that. In Chicago, that's how it's going to go. And then everybody's forced to sign the waiver, and half the people will say, I'm not signing the waiver, and then they'll document it in their,
I think if we're gonna go,
the end of it.
If we're gonna. At the end of it, then we can go ahead with the project. That's my question.
It is, but understand the reality, because in Chicago, they're willing to say, waiver, money, and walk away, and that's the end of it. Here, you're gonna get phone calls, and it's going to be a fight from each and every resident. And that's difficult. But the big difference is this, is the city of Chicago is gonna end up getting grant funds to take care of a lot of this.
Okay.
I just really want to.
Of course they are.
Before we get into the policy.
But that's also a place
You
where
can do a
they
lot
say
with
it's
free
a
money.
human right to
Hey
get
guys,
free
I
water.
really
so-
want to get it.
Agreed.
Can we just, I want a clear answer to this question, because the policy thing, I'm not totally spun around on. If somebody says, no, I'm not paying for it, no, I'm not signing the waiver, I don't think you can do your project.
no, we would,
You can, and we would just document it in our system that we gave them the waiver on the state.
But the law says we can't connect it.
it says they can refuse us access on their property. So what we do is I would submit to the state that here's what we've done. We've notified them. We've attempted to do it, and they won't let us do it. And then we would connect them and move on.
So you would connect it.
And we, and the caveat would be is we would give them an informational notice about the health risk of lead.
You're
I mean,
going way further
okay.
than
Yeah,
that
that's what
question.
you're about, right.
Can you connect to the lead service?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know.
We did it for all those years before Marvin project.
So-
In the Parkway.
So much to your surprise, the $98 a year, if that's a real number, or we think it's real as of today, right? $10 a, $9 a month, $8 a month. I probably would be okay with that, even if I'm not replacing my line already.
I'm gonna have to walk my,
Because, and you might want to record that.
I'm gonna have to walk
Because,
my,
quite honestly, there were
Yeah.
a lot of people complaining, like you said, about tree streets where I live and spending $60-some, $1 million, and they're paying a storm tax. So, if it's that low of a number, but it's all going to be part of the village.
On sprinklers, we've taken it on the stormwater, we've taken it on backflow preventers.
As much as I didn't think.
I think what's gonna also help this program, first of all, I'm gonna have to walk my trash to the curb now to pay for this. But,
Yeah, you make it.
I stay in bed on Thursday morning.
I know,
And I
I
can hear the
know.
guy rattling in the backyard as he's picking up.
No,
my
You
garbage.
have to bring your recycling
music.
out,
I think what,
or you don't recycle
I
it.
think what will help this
Well,
program,
garbage can.
hold on a second, I think what will help this program and keep you from getting calls is certainty on what the number is. If we say it's 9 or it's 14 or it's 13, if you say it's $9,000 with fees and this and that, I think a lot of people will go for it. I think and it's up to a $5,000 reimbursement. If we set a number and we get these contractors to do it for this number, I think people deal with certainty a lot better than a range.
Could we do a hybrid?
Well, but here's the thing, and Kim, hopefully this might give you a little comfort. All of these are going up,
Right.
okay? All of them are going up.
Yeah,
We
we're
are
not
still
high.
gonna be in the lower half of the cost of service. So people are still gonna be getting a good deal, even with an extra $100 a year tacked on. So it's not like we're pricing ourselves out of the market or doing anything extraordinary, or even putting our water system or the value of our properties at any risk of being singled out as, oh my God, I live in Northfield and I'm paying through the nose for water.
So,
Yeah, they buy their water from us.
From us.
right.
And then go to Palatine or wherever you're going, their
So-
water rates
Lombard
are.
is doing a
Yeah.
$5,000, 50%.
So, one,
This is your comfort, just that we're not pricing ourselves
Do
out.
we want to do something that hybrid to that point, that program, and if you fail, and we meet, I mean, just say that we're gonna, well, no, I guess that.
I think what you need to do
Everybody else.
in a policy, whatever we come up with, if you're doing a road program that's replacing the main, those houses we get done when we do the program. But if you have a random house that wants to come to the village and get their lead line replaced at our cost, we're not gonna do it. They pay their own. They have to wait until we do the main replacement or something.
And they could wait up to 17 years for that,
Whatever, then, right.
right?
Why would we, if somebody wants to step up and get it done, why wouldn't we help them?
Because they're gonna be all over the village doing water main work.
No, but if we give them a list of contractors that can do it, I mean, if
I would make it as part of our street
So
program.
you can budget for this thing?
Yes.
Right? I think what you wanna do is say, we budget like $500,000 a year for the next 17 years, which would be more than enough at $5,000 a house to cover like 94, probably cover like 110 or something, whatever, 100. And say, you know, we're gonna prioritize first to the streets and water mains that we're tearing out, and then whatever capacity we have left, get in the queue and, you know, sign up that way.
Because otherwise you're gonna be doing 3 houses on a block all over the village.
You're right, number 17. See, that's not right.
I don't think that's
Well,
right, because if I find notice that I've got a lead line,
Well, then, look, then we just unlimited budget and we.
Do all 1,300 tomorrow.
well, no,
So-
but that's what Chris
so one-
said, is that there would be ability for the general fund to make a loan in the case you
Yeah.
had more people.
This isn't because of a land of funds.
Right.
It's a matter of equity, you know.
Maybe not many, maybe the 1,500 people
Well,
know and they don't want
I
to.
think you just gotta figure out what the.
Yeah,
Toy with this
it is a matter of money.
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Because if you did more than
Younger people in town are.
30 or 40 a year, you're $98.
Right.
I don't think it's 98, I think
PFAS, I guess.
Oh, really? Well, bring that up, I mean, that's a big difference. What is that?
Okay, well, I took 15.
400 times 4,500 is 450,000.
Just the 5,000. I was doing the whole cost of this.
No.
So you're back on the charge to the individuals with lead.
Well, I wasn't necessarily back on that, but I mean, I think we were throwing around a lot of numbers at different times as we were
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
different programs.
So 1,500
So-
houses, $5,000 a house is $7.5 million divided by 17 is $441,000.
That is the fund.
$38 per year divided by 4,500 houses, $98 per house per year.
Right?
Right. So if one year you happen to do more than the 44
When Ryan
homes,
says, hey, Rob, I need some help.
So he's taking,
but
Yeah, so
you're not gonna use seven.
you're taking the estimated cost per year, that's the 1,500, 5,000, 17 years to complete, 7.5 million. And you're dividing that, whether you're gonna do it total or
But
annually
your
by the
5,000
5,000 people.
Your 5,000 cost per service is not just, that's not 100%, is it?
That's, no, that's just that was capped at 5, so.
That's,
Right.
that's our
one thing I'm
exposure.
unclear is, I've
That's
heard
just the
people
5,
talk about
yeah.
100%
Oh.
on the property or a cap of 5,000.
Okay, so then it goes back to, okay, if we're saying the ones with lead lines all get done when we do the street,
Right.
we're pretty much saying we almost have to tell people it's gonna be 100%. Because what if somebody doesn't wanna come up with the other $7,000 or
Right.
whatever it would be?
We have to do 100% if we're
So,
doing that
see, that's
route.
that's where I'm.
You think
sort of
100%?
saying, I feel like we're talking,
Yeah,
And you can only afford to do
you're right.
17 a
And
year,
maybe if
because
they don't
17
pay
years,
us, we charge them
the number of houses divided by
increased
17 years.
rate of-
Brian,
Okay.
I've got a question.
So, just to make it, the math worse,
Yeah.
maybe not the math worse, so I think you need to take into account, I forget which trustee brought it up, you can't wait for the water main, you're gonna need to give a path for the not waiting for water mains, because our replacement cycle is a 100-year replacement cycle. So people are gonna be mandated, or the village is mandated to replace that lead service line before we're going to get to those streets.
All right, well, that's fine then, because then you'll have to do a whole block, they'll pick a block that has the houses, that you go ahead and do a block at a time, and you systematically do that.
When you're,
But are you worried about from the main to the beat box? What if you've already gone down it, or like on Elm, perfect example?
So-
You're just connecting now from the beat box to the house.
Right.
Correct, so Elm was done, basically under the partial rules, so the village and Elm, I would expect for that area that we did work, is that there's gonna be from the main to the property line is copper, and there's gonna be some houses from the copper, from the property line into house that's lead,
So that's really interesting.
That's
So
my
if
son-in-law's
we've
doing
already,
it right now, that he's
yeah.
got that limit on
So
Elm.
if we've already got the copper to the B-box, whose responsibility in 17 years?
Right now, as
Okay.
defined,
Will you be here in 17 years?
we're the operators, so we gotta compel them or fund it, but you as the owner of the potable water system, the
Right.
act holds you responsible.
And that was the basis for trying to
That's
put a
just-
program
I'm
together.
Sign the
Right.
waiver, what happens 17 years from now? Do we
I'll do it.
we're good with waivers at that
Yeah, because when you
What-
sell the house, the buyer's gonna say, oh, I got a lead service, it's gonna cost you 12 grand, instead of paying 2 million for the house, they're gonna pay 12 grand less and replace the lead service.
No, but, so my question is just on the law. In the 17 years, we are supposed to make sure, as operators of the system, that there are no lead pipes
Or waivers all signed,
Or waivers.
or waivers,
yes.
and they're not gonna just yank that out from under us. We think
Well, whatever you think.
we think based on our past experience living in Illinois, that's a likely scenario.
Who would have ever thought they would mandate this, you know? I
I
mean,
grew up in Minnesota, and I still know better than
So,
Right.
Minnesota's the worst
Yeah.
when it comes to these things.
So
Oh my
one-
gosh.
one point I
Every
wanted-
government contract has to have every one of those WIMBY things.
so one of the points I wanted to make about what was presented here in terms of the rate increase in order to fund, this program, we're targeting, again, as an initial proposal, 7.82% to generate the additional $442,000 a year to fund the $5,000 program, right?
Right, you
Now,
double that.
now, keep in mind, as we've talked about, this was just a starting point. We could probably phase that in over time. You wouldn't have to do 8.5 plus 8. You could phase in that increase over the next 3 to 4 years in order to start to recapture, because the scale of this isn't gonna happen in year 2, right? So we're really trying, if you're interested in trying to do something like this, we can start to scale in the water rate to be able to fund it.
Right. But
So
the-
it doesn't have to compound immediately, but it would have to roll in a shorter period of time.
But to fund 100% to the homeowner, you have to double that,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
because it's only 5,000, not 10.
Right, yeah. If you're looking at-
So now we're talking 16%.
Yeah, so,
Who's
To your
gonna,
point, so if
you
somebody's
gotta
gonna
collect the
hold out
money,
in
good luck.
17 years, you have something
No,
that just
next year.
immediately
If
jacks
someone's
up
hold
the
out
water
next year
price.
on a water main replacement on a street, you're screwed, unless they sign the waiver. Or they refuse to sign, then I guess we're covered.
Yeah, we document it.
and then we still have that thing hanging over us maybe at some point, but I feel like 5,000, I feel like, look, if Lombard can do it, then I could sure.
Oh, for sure. yeah.
Right. No,
None of this is fair. I mean, when you look at the way the policy was drafted, the law became effective January 1. Then they say do an inventory. Then they say put a plan together. Well, but in the meantime, you got to deal with it. So they've given you 0 time to plan, and we're mandated to try to get this thing over
and
the
who
goal line.
sells a copper pipe? Friskers Copper Company?
That I
Okay,
don't know. But-
so I think one of
But-
the important thing is to obviously think of how to, for me, I want to make sure we are getting notices out to those 1,500 people, right?
Yeah.
And that, but we have, we have to have a coherent process or policy of what we're going to do, right? And how we're going to fund it.
Because if all 1,500 people say, oh, I want it tomorrow,
So that's
do
the
it.
question I
It's
was
like,
trying to
well, we
answer, is
can't.
The prioritizing, and
Right.
we did this with, what did we do? We did it with sewer backflow. We
yeah,
did
but the
it maybe a
backflow,
couple years.
wasn't like a health concern.
Right. Well,
It
In a
was,
way.
oh, yeah, it was.
In the basement,
Yeah,
but.
sewer in your
Right, but-
basement is a,
you ever seen that stuff bubbling up from the
oh,
floor?
yes.
Still
Oh,
happens in
yes.
Chicago, so
And-
come
and
on.
nobody gave me.
I don't think you're gonna be eating down there watching TV anytime
We
soon.
do the sprinkler program, we do like a reasonable estimate, do a pilot program for year 1, make sure it's big enough to cover the 94 houses that we have to do for our street program, and throw some other people at the end of the queue after those, and let's just figure out what the burn rate is on this thing, what the interest level is, and then you can budget for it going forward.
But I think you have to notify people, and maybe 1,000 of those people will decide to handle it on their own, right?
They might,
They're
And
knowing
we just
it's
give
when
them, and
that's
we
other.
just give them,
Well, oh, okay, so maybe eight
Five.
hundred, but maybe the rest are like, I've lived here 50 years, I'm still living.
if they handle it on their own, they'd have to go from the house to the main. And we still only give them $5,000.
And that number's gonna vary depending upon where the main is located.
The distance and where the main is.
Or they wait,
Do we-
you have to pay for it all.
Are we down the middle on most of these, or do we have long taps and short taps?
We have long taps and short taps, so you're gonna have customers that are gonna be, the main's in your parkway in front of your house, and then he lives across the street, so you gotta go all the way across the road, across his parkway to get to his house.
Well, there's where the rate should go up.
Oh, boy.
So you bought the house and you didn't realize you were buying a long tap.
Yeah, so I think, that I agree with, and let's see how it goes.
And it's gonna be a little different than your sanitary backflow or your sprinklers, because, as you said, there are a lot of people concerned about the lead. As soon as they say they got lead, oh, we're giving them $5,000, we all wanna do it tomorrow. You gotta
So we gotta figure out.
be careful
a
what
way
can
to-
happen,
yeah,
a lot of
you gotta
time
establish
it.
the queue.
My
We
gut- my
have a
gut is-
17-year process to do this.
Maybe we just stipulate a lump sum number
Yeah.
of elective changes, maybe 10 a year. that-
But what happens when
and
you have
once
100 people in here?
Then the first 10, it's just like, the backflow is that way too, John.
I know, but
We'll prioritize based on first our priorities,
Right.
which are streets and mains.
Yeah, so the proposal that we put on the table was, estimate about 30 lines a year at 5,000, so it'd be $150,000 for those who wanna take the work on their own.
Right,
That-
or
that would
I
be
can see how
separate.
they're gonna complain, it's
30.
not fair if you gotta
So
wait 10
the
years.
frame, the framework I proposed with the staff that supported this was we would budget, if you're at the 5,000, we'll continue moving forward in the budgeting process, and assuming we don't make a change in the pick list, we're gonna be doing 94 lead services as part of the water main work.
Right.
We should hold contingency funding for 14 leaks.
Emergencies.
Emergent leaks. That we would either pay, assuming you're doing the 5,000.
8 now.
And then whatever, either you could direct Tim and I, or you could let us come back to you at budget, is create a voluntary program, and we would look and see, after we roll up the budget, expenses, payroll, material costs, the capital projects, if we could do a project of voluntary funding, like, and I threw as a straw person up there 30 lines,
30 at 5.
then those 30 are the first come, first serve.
Is that workable, Brian? I mean, from a physical and practical standpoint, or is it just a number?
It's too early for me to tell, because we were waiting for you to set policy direction on what we were doing on the 5, because
It
it
sounds
has.
like a lot to me.
It's not, well, I think it's a lot, but we were concerned that if you said 100% funded, we've got to find $1 million in the current proposed budget. So we're waiting,
We just outlined a 650,000.
right. And it's probably not 30, it might be closer to 10. But I mean, we would go, that would be the pecking order, the water main projects, some amount of funding for contingency of water's gonna bubble up in the street, and then whatever else that we could reasonably afford. And then this is a two-way street, two-way dialogue of, you would have to say, what latitude are you giving Tim, Rob, and I to recommend a rate increase above the 8.5? Because if you wanted to fund the whole.
The 8.5 is what we're talking about now. right? I mean,
8.5 is what we would be proposing in absence of the lead service level funding would be a minimum of 8.5.
But that's what you have anyway, that's what we've already agreed to.
Right, well, right,
I
but-
mean, so, forget the 8.5, that's baked already, and we're not gonna take that away.
That's our baseline.
We can't.
Does that ever go away?
No,
Yeah,
well,
2025.
2025. Yep.
Remember this?
I think we need to be very
Oh,
clear.
I still have nightmares from that.
That was the electric, it was the electric rates. No, that was the electric one we're talking about.
No, the water was pretty brutal too.
Yeah.
Even on the plan development, where the first 94, we're still, we're paying the whole thing on those? Or
No.
It's still the same thing, okay.
So when you do a street, they have to pay their extra fee, or they sign a waiver.
And they don't get the 5.
Right,
If they sign a waiver, the 5 is gone forever.
right,
Sign a waiver, the 5 is gone.
right.
And it's safe for the
Right.
next
because Ben will sit down and take that IDPH form and add some more paragraphs to it, right?
So,
maybe in year one, the voluntary number is more like 10.
It is possible that over time they could refine the program and put more guidance together.
It is possible, but
Right.
Illinois?
Okay, just going back to the waiver forever. Okay, so the current homeowner signs the waiver.
No, good
And then 4 years from now, they sell the house after the whole street's been done and the new buyer wants it. How do you do that?
Tough.
Yeah.
It's a one-time shot.
Goes with the house.
Right, like you said, that waiver, somehow says that that house has a lead service.
Well,
The
which
waiver's
is one of
signed
the
or-
things that I kind of casually mentioned. I'm not all for government mandated disclosures, but you could pass an ordinance and we could make the brokers aware that you have to disclose in the village whether or not you have a lead line or
Right.
not
And
at
you
your
got that on
time
the
of
website,
closing.
someone just said, right?
I mean, I don't like those disclosures, but in this case, I think that would protect, yeah, yeah, yeah,
If I
yeah.
want the house, well,
Yeah.
either I walk away from the house, but then I can say, fine, I want a $10,000 credit at closing to fix the.
Right.
But we're
Yeah,
now saying
right.
you can't.
Yeah.
because
Oh, they can fix it.
the waiver
Oh, they can fix it.
They can privately
Yeah, they
fix
just
it.
gotta pay for it
They're
themselves.
just not gonna get the one-time government.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
so,
you put the disclosure on the owner, right?
I'm sorry?
You put the disclosure on the owner at
Yeah,
sale?
yeah,
at sale?
just make, just say, we could pass an ordinance saying that, all, sellers of real estate have to disclose to the new prospective buyer whether their house, and inform them of the database and, and that whether or not their line is, and then
And-
make sure the brokers
Make sure
know.
we put
And-
a package together
and
for all
on
the
that
realtors.
database, would it be legal to add another column? Waiver signed not to replace lead pipe. Is that legal? Why not? Then it's,
We're just keeping score at that point.
When you do a closing, don't you take a like water bill or something?
Yeah.
You gotta get a final.
Final water
So
bill.
Can't we just change our water bills to reflect that?
But you want to do it early at the contract, when the contract's
no, that's
signing,
right. That'd be-
not
we'd
closing, not at the closing table.
Look at the water bill on the
Yeah.
thing as opposed to people doing the closing. They
Yeah.
go, oh, hey.
Yeah, or it owes 40 bucks.
And then after read all the line.
Yeah.
yeah, that website, if you got the data.
So I think it's important to get it as part of the contract
And
closing.
we also know then who
Or
signed the
listing.
waiver.
And then they can negotiate it, who pays, if they're, if the purchase price is reduced.
But you have to think about how you, if 500 people come in tomorrow, say, I want my water replaced.
That's why we gotta.
You gotta be careful.
Established in front of
Yeah.
us.
So if you only have
Or-
X amount per year, if
Right.
it's, after that, they're on their own.
And figure out an annual discretionary amount. I think 30 might be too many in year one.
For the first.
I think, given, 94 seems like a lot.
94 is gonna be a nightmare to get done on the 6 projects.
Is it just an unhappy luck of the draw?
Yeah, so actually depending on what your
Yeah.
policy is, like I've already started thinking, I wish I'd never put that up there, because maybe I should go back and pick 6 other projects less than
Well,
94.
you can dance around it later, but I think if 450, 500 a year gets us replacing all of these things in the 17 years, so I think that should be our run rate.
Let's, yeah,
I think first year, if we point this out,
I think a lot of people,
But if we're only willing to give up $5,000, they can do it all on their own then, after that.
It's a fair deal.
they don't wanna wait,
Then they pay for the whole thing themselves. They pay for it themselves and do it. Or buy water filters.
or she's the,
We'll have to have
she's
a
gonna be one of
pilot.
the first
It's,
people
yeah,
to.
I agree with you.
But it's gotta be a limit on that pilot a year.
I think we can pilot.
The reaction everybody had when there were lead pipes in the schools, that we were like, governments to do that. And I understand, agree with you, that people do it properly. No one's dying of lead poisoning right now. But people still.
No, but
It's still a
I
health
think,
hazard.
no, it's a huge issue. I mean, even my niece lived in a house and there was a lead disclosure. She never ate the paint. Never ate the paint. She still had lead, she had tested very high for lead and, once they got that out of her system. So, I mean, lead is very pervasive and that's why it is taken seriously and it does disproportionately hurt children's brain development, so.
I think trustee Dahlman's comment, if there's an inclination to consider it, would be an interesting one, because I think a real estate transaction disclosure might inadvertently trigger more people trying to get it done, so they have a clean
Right.
bill of sale, or as a condition of the real estate deal, so that even if they didn't fit into the bucket, that would be potentially a
they
compelling
get it
way
done,
to get
and
a couple
it may
more
save
done
us
a
money.
year.
And I could see somebody who's lived in
On
their
their
house
own.
50 years, oh, I don't care about it, I'm still living, whatever, but then the person they're trying to sell the house to does care, and then that triggers the discussion. Yeah.
If we,
How do you get certainty on the, what, 3 or 4 contractors, maybe 5, I don't know, whatever it is, 3 contractors, with your fees and everything, here's what your number's gonna be? Is that possible?
I think you're gonna still end up with some units, because copper is the cost, and it's a distance factor, so you have
Well,
a
no,
house.
I think you'll come, yeah.
So you're gonna probably negotiate, create your units, and then do like typical mock-ups of a lead service project, and say these 3 contractors are offering the best value for the units that we expect a Winnetka resident to incur.
Well,
based
I
on-
don't know
it's
if
not
you could
as
say
hard
best
for-
value, but I think you could say these are recognized contractors, you
And
know,
here's
that-
the pricing.
yeah.
Either on a
And
lineal
it's not
foot.
gonna hurt us,
I
because
would say on a lineal foot,
Lineal
right,
foot would be
yeah.
the way to
You
go.
would say is we negotiate a flat fee, you can use it if you like or not.
and it's not gonna hurt us either way on the cost, because we're only giving it $5,000.
But more people will be willing to do it. If it's 13,000, or maybe 5, it's one thing, if it's 10 grand or $9,000, you get that work, it helps.
I just,
I know my own kids work the others.
the question is, I don't know how much markup in the current environment that contractors making on a copper service. So some of the same markups we've seen, you know, copper's up, all the fittings are up, that they'd have to, so I don't know what their, unfortunately, I don't have an insight into what their markup is on a utility type project, but I guess I don't know if that would be $6,000 on a $15,000 job.
Unlike if you're doing 20 homes on a block, it's gonna be a lot more economical
Right,
to do all 20.
right. And
Then
then,
And
one
that's
at a
gonna
time.
be the inducement to a bigger number.
Right,
right,
so
and
the inducement
then
might be
people can
trying.
get together and also talk about it with their neighbors, right? They see,
Probably you're right.
So,
which is,
look, guys,
which would happen.
I know that there's some discomfort with giving people money. Okay, but the thing is that this wasn't foisted on those people by us. You know, I mean, this is something that was forced on them by the state. Notwithstanding Tina's comments about public health, which I agree with totally, this is something that we definitely should be dealing with. It's just the manner that the current administration dealt with it is
No worry.
pandering during an election year more than anything. And now we're stuck dealing with it. I don't like the idea of giving free money away, but at the same time, we do have the ability as the village to soften the blow. You know, I mean, people pay a shitload of taxes in this town, and if we can help, A, improve the public health of the community, and B, help out people in our community, as opposed to helping out somebody in Dixmoor or South Holland or Country Club Hills or Harvey or Sauk Village, where they have just totally let their systems go to hell and have never done anything positive with the money that they did receive. But that's a whole other story.
Well, our federal tax dollars will bail out Jackson, Mississippi. I
Well,
mean,
there you go.
yeah, there you go.
But we pay it there and it goes somewhere else,
Right.
which has been my biggest bitch for the last 5 years anyway, that
Right.
we deserve to get some of this money back for ourselves. But this is a case where obviously it's gonna be really hard. But, so we have, that's the decision to make. Are we going to understand what we're doing is actually a public health positive, and that we're helping out people in our own community, who might not be able to help it, just like we have, Andy, much to your case, to your statement before about, you know, the other things we've subsidized over the years.
Well, it's also making our system predictable for our infrastructure improvement, right? And it's helping us meet our needs for water main and roadway improvements by creating an incentive.
Well, the sad thing is this year we blew up a really major road and water main endeavor
Yeah.
because of this. I mean, we had to change the whole program after the fact, which was
Right.
horrible. And you guys did a great job trying to figure out what the hell you could do with what we did, but still. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a mandate on the utility.
That's what I think, yeah.
Not this government.
But there's no guarantee to get rid of him in 17 years.
Not this government, I think we're a little bit better than lead pipe, so. But that's the only thing that kind of gets me to the other side of the equation is that, you know, it isn't a subsidy in the way that people think of subsidies. I mean, we really are just complying with a mandate that none of us really agree with, but we can see the positive benefits of complying with it, so. I mean, are we okay with that?
Yeah, I totally changed my attitude during this meeting about, I'll pay my share. Other areas paid the stormwater shares, I mean, it's,
And there may be some blowback from it, to be honest with you. I mean, people are saying, wait, I don't live in a storm floodplain.
yeah, I've heard that, right.
I replacement
Right.
copper pipes, my own expense,
No, it's,
for
yeah.
$100.
Interestingly enough, Rob, I don't think we're gonna see, Tina, you were very, in an unusual case, at least in my thinking, that you actually were proactively talking about replacing your water line.
Yes.
Can you do that next week?
Which is, I think most people look at it and say, you know, just like somebody else,
I don't
it's been
know.
there for 50 years.
Right.
No, young families,
Young families are very
Rob's
worried
daughter
about it,
and
yeah.
her husband are thinking in a different way.
And as former trustee Kim Mancini is also very concerned, and she said a lot of her friends and, you know, the talk around carpool pickup is, you know, the forever chemicals, right? I mean, like, there's a very big
Yeah.
focus on this, so.
My son Penton makes me test our water every 6 months, but he gives some of the best water in there.
Yeah.
But if they're dumping crap in Lake Michigan up in Milwaukee, we really can't do anything about
that's
it,
right.
right? So,
Right, but I think people are very worried, and, you know, we want us to be, you know, a place that does, you know, people have trust in our system, right?
no, I guess the bottom line is I don't think this should be viewed as some, you know, left-wing giveaway. It really is just helping out the people in the community.
Yeah.
Silly question, is there any lead intakes out of the lake or in the water plant, or, I mean, it'd be
In the
terrible to
con-
have it like
in
a
the
big
conveyance
lead,
system?
fake, right, it's a 4-foot lead pipe coming in.
No 4-foot lead pipes,
In the
no, although.
conveyor.
Right?
the
Just
water
the
mains-
obvious.
The water mains are actually, there's, you know, leaded joints where they pack the joint between two pipes, but the actual water main's all ductile, cast iron, cast iron.
Don't even say that, Brian, because you know that lead solder is the next thing. I mean, it's gone already.
Yeah.
But there's so many houses that have lead
There's
solder.
well, that's what I explain a lot when people call and they say, we test high in lead in our house, and they wanna do it, it's like, you can replace your service line, but
Still
older
have lead
homes still
pipe.
could have it, if you haven't updated your
Oh, I-
fixtures or your pipes or the solder in your house, you're only dealing with from the house to the property, you know,
Right,
property line to the
right.
main, or the house to the main, excuse me. You could still have stuff that you haven't changed in your house and still get high lead levels in your house. And a lot of people don't think about the fixtures or the solder that was actually in their house.
Oh, I know.
As copper goes up in price, is there something else to replace? I mean, can they do it with PVC or not?
P-TEX.
You can do
I don't think
PVC. I've been exceedingly reluctant to approve PVC for the following, is we're required to locate it. The gas company uses plastic pipe, and to be honest about it, how they locate, and I kid you not, is they come out, they can say, I can't locate this gas line, it's plastic gas line, brand new. They're measuring off of an abandoned gas line to figure out where the new gas line is. And so I've told, Nick's gonna laugh, I said, as long as I'm water and electric,
I
it's
didn't know
metal
gas
for
was
locating.
Isn't there a
thought it
trace
was
line they
gas
put in
line.
there?
They put a trace line on it, it's a little tiny wire, and
right.
then sometimes they'll run
And
it
it
into the
moves.
house, or the homeowner cuts it off at the ground line, so where do you connect to
Oh.
when you go to locate it? And so it creates, from an operational perspective, a nightmare on the locating and the potential for increased damage claims.
And then you're gonna find PVC 20 years from now is not good for you or something.
And so basically, at this point in time, I've strongly affirmed from our perspective that we do not want to be in the plastic pipe for water service lines in Winnetka.
I'm just asking, because the copper keeps going up.
It does keep going up, it's kind
It's
of
gonna be changed.
come down a little bit, but still up. That's what the streets look like when the water mains break.
Right, right. Okay.
Are we okay, guys?
Thanks for the important back
Not an easy-
information. Yeah, a lot of research
Thank
and
you
work
for your
doing it.
patience
Yeah,
and your
yeah.
I
input.
love study sessions.
Have the backhoe at your house tomorrow.
I do. This is,
No,
This is the
according
only
to the
reason
list,
why I
we have
do this
copper.
job.
I'm just
Good,
like,
good.
this is the way.
I do
mean,
filter my drinking water though.
Once you get up here, it all changes, you know? I mean, down here, but we can only come here once a month. unless we had more meetings, and I'm sure you guys aren't up for that. All right, you guys got what you need now?
Yes, sir.
Brian?
Thank you.
Okay. Now we have another closed session, and then we can go home.
Ha ha ha. Christmas humor.
I want to thank
Have a good time.
the village attorney and the finance
Yeah,
team, though, we
you
had a
guys-
lot of help in
Yeah,
putting
you
this
guys did a
together.
great job. Thank
This
you.
is the first time I've been willing to listen to a 23-page PowerPoint. So
It would've
I,
It was
I'm
well
sitting
done.
here, I know, and I was like, we just read about it in the memo, so I was like, okay.
So, okay, the good news is tonight, it's item number 4. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.